Hey John, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to share a little bit about what I've been up to and answer some questions and have some fun.
So I was looking into your background and as part of the research for this conversation, and you've done so many things in your career. It's almost like confusing to me to where to get started with, but it's also a good thing because we have a lot of shared interests. I think the conversation is going to be fun. But just to give a little bit introduction to the audience, can you talk a little bit about your early education and your early career?
Absolutely. As I always start off with, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, which was a big part of who I am today. And I refer back to it often and think back to it often as a place that was a very free place to grow up as a kid. And we would run around the neighborhood and didn't have a lot of restriction and could be creative and pursue our creativity side and have a lot of friends. And it was a very Mayberry RFD kind of experience growing up. And my parents were really encouraging of us trying things. And I think that has been a big part of my life throughout. And I did decide for college to basically try and go as far away from Omaha as I could. So I looked on the East Coast and I looked on the West Coast and ended up in Palo Alto at Stanford. And again, super incredible time of my life where I got to just try a lot of things and explore and created a great set of friends and rich experiences. And it's funny, I've always been a person who says, I haven't done that before. I think I should go try that. And so after college, I ended up saying I'd never lived in the South. So I went down to Dallas and I did real estate down there. And my family's been involved in real estate for a long time. And my brother is very active in real estate. My father was really a leading edge developer of apartments in Nebraska. So we've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial dinner table conversation orientation, if you will. And after that, I went back to Stanford. And actually, right after that, I also spent time in Asia because I'd never done Asia. And I thought, oh, that would be really interesting. And I learned some Chinese and I did some volunteer work, which is always important to me. Then I went back to business school. And from there, I was so lucky to be exposed to technology and venture capital, and again, more entrepreneurship. And I think those pieces that I've just described to you are very much the foundation of the path I took.
How did because you did your undergraduation, then you did your Asian studies, and then you did your MBA at Stanford.
Yeah.
How did Stanford ended up shaping you?
Well, Stanford at the time was really an incredible college experience and on the leading edge of what a college experience meant, I think. They encourage you to think about things differently. The amount of support around developing your own major or having access to resources or just being in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, even though back then it was very nascent, was still influential. And the thing I loved about Stanford, it was an incredible mix of work and play and people who cared about you and supported you in whatever dream you wanted to carry out. And so it's really, I have to say, formed my way of thinking of how I want to be in the world, how I want to support my family, how I want to support entrepreneurs, how I want to pursue my career. Because I was always told, yeah, why not go try that? Why not do things a little bit differently? Why not explore? And so I think for me, Stanford really played an influential role there. And just being around, I was inspired. I mean, part of the most important thing to me in life is inspiration. And I'm constantly trying to reach out to people who can inspire me, read books, listen to podcasts, And Stanford had that in spades. And I took full advantage of that when I was there. So I think that's really how it set the foundation for me.
And post Stanford, how did your career start?
Yeah, so I was pretty darn sure that I was either going to do real estate because of the family connection, which I felt was quite entrepreneurial, or I was going to do venture capital. And venture capital back then was pretty darn new. In fact, when I said venture capital, people, they looked at me like, what's that? Which is kind of funny. And when I say that today, everyone smiles because it's so much part of our world. And everyone knows what venture capital is, right? But back then, nobody did. And I've always been a person attracted to, if everybody's going right, I'm going to go left. If there's a parade, I'm going to go around it. And venture capital seemed to have everything that one would ever want to do in life. It was an opportunity to be entrepreneurial. It was an interesting asset class from a return standpoint. It was on the leading edge of technology. It was changing the world. I got to meet with really smart people, smarter than me, and learn every single day. And there's a bit of a journalist in me. I was a journalist in college. I was an editor of one of the papers. I was on my high school yearbook. And so for me, asking questions, learning about other people, I've always thought I should do a podcast because I love what you do. And it's just a great opportunity everybody has a great story, right? And you combine that great story in the case of venture capital with someone pursuing a dream, thinking up a new way of doing things and changing the world. What could be better? And so I thought, okay, coming out, I'm gonna do either real estate or venture capital. And then along comes this guy and says to me, well, have you ever been to Seattle? And I never had, actually. And remember, from what I've already said to you, I like to go where I haven't before, whether it's Asia or Dallas or East Coast or West Coast. And he said, there's a little company called Microsoft that I'm involved with. And would you like to we'll fly you up. Why don't you come interview? And I thought, okay, to see Seattle, why not go do that? And it was the most grueling set of interviews I'd ever experienced. And some people would take that and think, oh my gosh, this is painful. It was the exact opposite for me. Every conversation was super exciting. They were presenting real life case studies, what the things they were working on, how would I approach it, how to think about it. And for me, that actually cemented the deal. I went in a direction I didn't think I was going to do. It wasn't real estate and it wasn't venture capital, but because the people inspired me, that's where I went. And maybe there's a lesson there. If you can find great people to be around, people that you feel like are smarter than you, that you can learn from, that can inspire you, maybe that's the way to pick out a job. For me, it was anyway, and it served me really, really well.
This was late 80s and early
Correct.
90s, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So what was it like?
Don't bring that up. It sounds like I'm a dinosaur.
Well, what was it like to work for Microsoft back then?
So exciting. I honestly, younger people today, if I say this, probably think I'm a little cuckoo, but I think we thought we were changing the world. I mean, the tenacity and the excitement that everyone felt coming to work was palpable. We all really were clear about the marching orders. Back then, Bill said a PC on every desk in every home. And we believed it. We felt like this thing called a computer, this personal computer, was the most important thing that was going to change the world. Now, because they're ubiquitous today, and actually our phone is more our computer in some ways, maybe we look back on that time and say, yeah, whatever, it was going to happen. But at the time, I had a cot in my office. I slept in my office. And it's funny to me to hear people who work at some of the larger tech companies today who say, oh yeah, my boss says, don't work so hard. Or, they're getting all this, the benefits, massages, and their nails done and free food. And I'm thinking to myself, really? Is that the right way to build this hardcore going to take the world by storm company? Maybe. It's just a different world for sure. But back then, we all thought we were in the trenches together, doing something that was truly different, unique, and it was going to be part of our legacy. And it was just exciting. And honestly, the people there were so smart. And what was also interesting is the way Microsoft hired back then. And that taught me something. Microsoft hired not for experience, because who had experience in startups or tech companies? There just weren't that many, right? They hired people who were tenacious and were smart, right? And were independent thinkers and didn't mind having someone say to them, no, you're wrong, and see if people could respond to that. Yeah. And so it was such a special time. And I feel like I sat on the front row of the world changing and had a great seat and got to be part of it. So that's what it was like.
Amazing. And then you went on to work at AOL and started your own company?
Yeah, so I did after Microsoft. I lasted 5 years. I'm not a big company person. I knew that. But it was great, as I said. But I knew the venture thing was still something I thought about. And so I left and started really small in actually finding deals and presenting them as one-offs, a little bit like the angel list syndicates today, if you will.
Yeah.
But back then there was no such thing, of course. And so I would have to have these gatherings. That's a theme of my life, getting people together. I've done that for 30 plus years. And I would present a deal and maybe I'd get a few investors, and it started building up. And that led to some people saying to me, why don't you just do a fund? Don't keep coming back to us every time. We get what you're doing. And that led to the creation of sort of what I'll call Staenberg Ventures 1 and Staenberg Ventures 2. And my whole premise back then was connecting Seattle and San Francisco, Seattle and Silicon Valley, which is to say Microsoft with the startups there, because Microsoft at that time was the big player. And people were always nervous if they were going to start a company. What was Microsoft doing? Or was there a way to partner with Microsoft? It's funny, again, today people don't think that way as much, of course. But back then I called it, I'm the bridge between the two important regions. And it worked out great because it allowed me as a small fund, a small investor, to get into some deals where people said, yes, we would like you to be part of this. You can kind of make sure we've got that piece covered as part of your value add. And so I always try and think, what's my unique differentiator? What's my value add if I'm going to take something on? And so that's how I positioned myself and had a great run. And we did, as I said, 2 funds. And then I became part of a larger fund in LA called Rustic Canyon Partners. And the whole time, again, it was just this marvelous front row seat into the world changing.
I was checking, how many deals you're part of. I think you're approximately part of 200 deals. I think
it might be more. It might be more. I'm not sure that's a badge of honor, but I have been quite active. And the nature of venture, right? It's you hope that you get the outsized return one to cover for a lot of mistakes. And but I also, it's funny, I don't say this publicly very often, but part of why I want to do this is because I feel like I'm supporting entrepreneurship and the ecosystem, and nothing makes me happier. Of course, I love it when the outcome is great for me, but nothing makes me happier than to see an entrepreneur, blood, sweat, and tears, succeed. So for me, it's an odd way of sort of giving back. I don't want to make it sound like I'm holier than thou, but for me, it's really important to support the entrepreneurs in this country and to be part of that. I get a lot of excitement when they succeed, and if I can be helpful in that process in any way. So I've been quite active both as a fund manager, as a GP, but also as an angel investor.
So, you've been part of some iconic company deals, I think, right? DocuSign, StubHub, Splunk, Automatic, which is the company behind WordPress,
Yep.
and Avalara. So, what was your biggest, exit sort of company, in either the fund or individually?
Yeah, I've been lucky to have a few good ones for sure. The one that I think I really didn't have a lot to do with, but was just a good example of being at the right place at the right time and creating friendships. May have been Seagate, actually.
Mm.
There was back then, there was a little private equity company called Silver Lake, which wasn't actually little at all, but it was doing something others hadn't done before. And a couple of the GPs were friends of mine. And I just always think it's funny to think back to that capitalization table where it was basically taking Seagate private to take them public later in a very incredibly creative financial move, as well as allowing this company not to have to deal with public market quarter by quarter and actually grow this business to bring it back out later and to split off its pieces and et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, the point is the cap table was something like Silver Lake, I don't remember the exact numbers, had hundreds of millions of dollars invested. Goldman Sachs, same thing. August Capital, same thing. And then there was my little fund, Staenberg Capital, at $10 million, which it was an asterisk, but it returned our fund and led to a whole bunch of other great things. And it just happened. I was at a conference talking to someone, and I didn't expect this, but someone said to me, "Hey, we're doing this deal. It's the most exciting deal I've ever done. You want to be part of it?" I'm like, "Yes, please. That would be amazing." And I dug in and I got to learn about it. I was like, this is incredible. And if I had been a bigger fund, I would have done more. And it was back when it was a tough time in venture. So it ended up, the reason it's so important to me, it ended up bringing my fund back to life, really, because we had a really tough run. And so it was a little bit of a pivot for me. It was a little bit about me being in the right place at the right time. And just, again, working with really smart people. And it's fun because Seagate's still around and they're doing incredibly well. And it'll always have a very special place in my heart for helping me at a time when it was much needed.
Oh, in all your investing career, were there any big misses that you had an opportunity to invest but couldn't?
So many big misses. Are you? Oh yeah. I mean, here's what I like to say about misses, and it took me a while to really understand this. Someone said to me the other day, "Gosh, we got to figure out this AI thing. I got to get in now. It's clearly changing the world." What people always forget is that if you had bought Amazon in the first couple of years, you'd be up, 3 digits X, right? If you had bought Google, same thing. So I missed a lot, right? And sometimes I thought I did some that this was so clear, but I was too early. The company was too early. Timing is a really difficult thing. And one of the things that is hard especially about being a small investor, an angel investor, is you don't really get to go along for the ride actively. You're a little bit the flotsam and jetsam on the ocean. And if the ocean's rising, you're rising. If it's not, if it's turbulent, you're not steering that ship. And the alignment of interests from an investor standpoint, the big guys really aren't that concerned about you, little guy, little angel. And so that's made me think about how I invest today and what I'm doing. But I had a lot of misses. And I will say this too, that as much as I'd like to be able to tell you at any point in my career, this is the one that's going to be great, constantly surprised on the upside and surprised on the downside, meaning I thought this was going to be the company that was going to return my fund. It failed. I never thought this little guy company would be much of anything, and then it became something amazing. So the surprise factor, and that's borne out, by the way, in venture, and I don't want to get off too much on a tangent, but there's a lot of venture funds do what's called an opportunity fund, where they take their best deals and then double down and raise a separate vehicle to do that. Those funds you would expect to be great because they know, right, what's going to be good. They're generally not. So
this is happening again in a sort of different sense, because we are seeing funds which are investing in early stage like seed and pre-seed raise opportunity funds for secondaries.
That's right.
And I sort of tend to not believe that the same fund can make that good decision, even though they think that they have more information. But honestly, correct. The one that is discounted, maybe you don't have the information because you didn't invest in the seed and pre-seed.
Well, so you're close to it and you're biased.
Yeah. So I feel like it's sort of like the same cycle happening in a different form with these unique secondary opportunity deals, which I think people who run venture firms are not suited to do secondary funds. Like I think people from private equity may be better people to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the thing about the movie we're watching, it's repeated itself and will continue to repeat itself.
I think that's a good segue for you to talk about, what are you seeing, with all your experience with running two funds, very early on in, the whole venture ecosystem, seeing the downs and ups and, the 100Xs and, even the zeros. What is happening right now? How do you see, we have seen this incredible high in last, 2021 where everything got peaked, and then we're sort of in all the growth stocks went down, and that is sort of defining the private market behavior.
Sure.
So how are you seeing the state of venture capital right now?
Well, look, it's messy, it's noisy, it's crowded. It's one of the reasons I'm not as directly involved. Go ahead. Do you want to say something?
Sure. Is VC now too big so that the edge and the alpha that you can generate is much harder and much smaller?
I think so. Look, to be clear, technology is exploding. We are not at the end game, even close, right?
Yeah.
And to be clear, unlike when I was doing venture in the beginning, when you had one technology and then a next technology and a next technology, today you have an explosion of technologies, right? We didn't have that. We had personal computing, and we had networking, and we had the internet, and we had serial kinds of big tidal waves. Now you've got this incredible, everything from clean tech to med tech to real estate tech to AI to quantum computing to space tech and, so on, right? And so naturally, money is going to flow into that because they all promise these incredible things to change the world. So it's not surprising, but we talked about timing earlier. We have no idea on the timing of this stuff, but people can make some really interesting big bets right now, and that's going to bring money in. My personal view as an investor hat, with my investor hat on, or Stanford in this case, my personal view is that I'm not clever enough, I'm not full-time enough, I'm not immersed enough, I'm not anything that I can make those kinds of decisions on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to invest in a couple of broad-based funds because I still want exposure to the alpha that's possible in venture, but it is harder today. And there's going to be a lot of money lost. A lot of money is flowing in. And venture is it relies on the macro. It relies on a robust M&A market. It relies on a good IPO market. And if those things aren't there, well, your returns are not going to be as good, period, end of story, right? So I'm still going to have exposure to it personally, but it's going to be less. And because these ideas are so big right now that we're talking about, I go back to my comment about being able to, as a personal investor, invest later, whether it's a public opportunity or what have you, and maybe do great. Maybe you don't get the 10,000 to 1, but hey, I'm okay with 1,000 to 1 kind of situation. So for me, look, I love venture, to be clear. And I'm always going to wake up in the morning and read my various tech and venture newsletters. But I'm just not as active investing directly like I used to be. I've saved that for something else that we can talk about later if we get there. But for me right now, venture is really tough. But of course, a ton of money is flowing in. How could it not? These are some ideas that are some of the biggest in the history of personkind.
Yeah. You somehow then also figured out to launch a wine company in all this. How
17 years ago.
How did that
people go, how long have you been doing this? And I say, in dog years.
Yeah.
It's funny. I went to business school, as you know, and we would do business case studies, right? And I think wine may be the absolute worst business model I've ever encountered.
Why is that?
Think about it, right? What are things that make a bad business model? Well, having inventory is tough, right? But not only that, having inventory where you have to guess how much you will sell. You have really no idea. You're a farmer at the end of the day. So what happens when the hail comes, which that's real, by the way, or the Zonda wins? So that's tough. You're in a regulated industry. That's another layer of complexity, right? I'm doing it in Argentina. Let's make it hard, both from a country risk, political risk, and just 10,000 miles away. I'm in a category that is competitive. It's hyper competitive, right? When I started, there were X number of wineries. Today, there's more than 2X number of wineries. When I started, there wasn't microbreweries, micro distilleries, non-alcoholic. So the cannabis. Like, think about all the choices that people have today. When I started, there used to be a thing called loyalty. The new generation has no loyalty. They want to try the next cool thing. I think I could keep going, but I think you're starting to see why I think this is not the best business model. I like to say to people, you want to be in the wine business, make a lot of money somewhere else and buy great wine because it's quite enjoyable.
But still you went ahead and decided to start one, right?
An idiot, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. How did that happen?
I truly, to not completely make light of this. Look, I did it for the following reasons. I was lucky enough to partner with a great winemaker who was in my business school class. His wine was ethereal, great, life-changing. I mean, really got wine after I drank his wine. Argentina is seductive as hell. If anyone goes down there, let me know, and I'm happy to give you some tips and tricks. But most importantly, I did a very simple back of the envelope calculation. And that was, I could buy land, beautiful, rich terroir, soil down in Argentina for about 1/100th the cost of Napa. And so really, I led with a purchase of land down there, thinking that was going to be a great investment. And then I did get into the wine business, which is hard. The land has done great. The wine business has done okay. Net, it's been an incredible experience. I checked the box. And in the last 2 weeks, I've had 4 wine dinners. And so I use the wine as kind of a way to bring people together. And it works. And, people get connected, ideas happen, startups happen. I get to meet incredible people. So I've integrated it into my life and my investments. And so it's actually been an incredible journey.
That's a good segue to ask you about, because we met in one of the events that you hosted.
Right.
And while I was researching, I realized that you have this common thread of hosting events in some form or another. I think you have the executive club, then you have the Top Chef, you have Wood. So you, all through your career, you kept a way to sort of bring people together. Talk to me, like, why do you do that? What do you get out of it? And how did it really help you in your career or even personal life?
It is. And this is a great example. This is how we met. That's how it helps me, right? I think I get it from my mother, who would have I remember growing up and we would always have people in the house and there were parties going on. And I'm a real people person. As I said, it goes back to a little bit my journalist roots. I know everyone has a story, and I know good things happen when, actually, I'll tell you very good when I get people together, but I'll tell you a story. I had a conversation yesterday with a gentleman who said to me, I don't know if you remember me, but 15 years ago, I came to one of your events, and I said to you at the time, you have the best events I go to, bar none. He said this to me yesterday. I said, oh, that's really nice. And he said, you said to me, don't tell me that, but tell my team, tell my admin who helped me with it. And it's always been a team effort. But this person who said that to me said, I hear you're working on this new fund. I remember what you did back then. I heard about your new fund from this other person. Can I invest? So 15 years, I haven't talked to that person in a long time. And yet it comes around full circle. And we had this great catch up and conversation. That's just one small example. We've had marriages from this thing. We've had, and by the way, these events, I love them. They're kind of exhausting. I've been in San Diego, Salt Lake City, Seattle, and San Francisco doing these events in the last couple of weeks. And I still do them because it's a little bit of my karmic service of bringing people together. And I do them without really an agenda. People always say, well, don't you want to have a speaker? Or don't you want to have are you selling something? And no, it's really about just bringing people together. And it helps me stay relevant. It helps me be in the flow of conversation. I'm always learning. What I've always tried to do is combine my interests. Interest of learning, interest of bringing people together, interest in the wine, interest in sharing ideas, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why I do them. And it's funny, I hadn't thought about this, but back in the day when I left Microsoft, we're talking a long time ago, I would hold these events called Schmooze Fest in Seattle. And they got so big, we had to stop because I couldn't find places. There were 1,000 people at several of them. And so it has always been something I've done. And it's kind of my superpower. I think it's important to figure out where you are gravitating towards and what you're good at and what you can do to help people. And I've always embraced the connection part. Every single day almost, I get someone emailing me saying, hey, this person, would you be willing to connect me? And if I can do little favors like that, that makes me feel good and hopefully helps people.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's one of the reasons I started the podcast, because I'm interested in talking to interesting people.
Right.
And it's a good way to meet interesting people and sort of do it consistently, and you're not falling off the tracks, and you can continue your curiosity and learn new things. Like if I want to start a wine company next, which I would not, but I know that I could talk to John. Yeah, I'll talk to John, and maybe he'll convince me to, start a wine company, even though I'm not convinced, right?
Again, happy to open a bottle with you. Don't do it.
But that's exactly the same reason I started this, and especially in a remote world, right? It's much harder to sort of build a network that you would have otherwise built in a in-person first world where you have even if you are in an in-person world, you're sort of limiting your directions in which you meet. Like let's say you're working at Microsoft, you're only meeting people who are working at Microsoft. You're not meeting other people who are doing other interesting things. So
Right.
that's one of my sort of, You Have Your Events podcast is my sort of platform for doing that. But
Great.
I think it's also now a good segue to talk about your next thing that you're doing. While everyone is, going the right way into venture capital, you're moving away from it and going to start a search fund, which honestly, I didn't know what a search fund was until I met you and started doing some research around it. So why don't you go ahead and, introduce what a search fund is and tell us, why you're doing it now.
Sure. Well, I think that is a good segue. I talked a little bit about my concerns about venture, about my capabilities and abilities and willingness to do direct venture investing these days. And so I have been thinking about what are the things I can do given where I am in life, my interests in life. Being a dad, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I want to make sure that I'm present for her and not working 70 hours a week like I used to. And so what are some of the things I can do in that realm? So search funds kind of check the boxes for me. It's exciting on so many levels. It's an extraordinary asset class. And I'm going to talk a little bit about them, but I would encourage, I don't know if you have liner notes, but I would encourage your audience to look up the Stanford Search Fund Primer and the Stanford Search Fund results. And in about 20 minutes, it will give you an amazing overview of what search funds are. But let me tell you here what they are. My professor at Stanford, just one special person by the name of Irv Grossbeck, invented search funds. And what is a search fund? And this, by the way, was back in 1984. And we didn't know much about them coming out, but they intrigued me back then. I ended up in venture, as we talked about, but I am now coming back to search funds a little bit late. You want to know what? You said, what are the ones you missed? Maybe I missed the whole search thing because it's been an incredible run. Search funds are very simply and I'm talking about a traditional search fund model, as talked about in the Stanford Primer, is where an MBA student from a top business school raises a small pool of cash called a search fund. I don't love the name because it's not really a fund, but raises a pool of cash to search for, acquire, and run a small business. So instead of taking what would be a typical job out of business school, like at a McKinsey or a JP Morgan or a Google, what have you, they take the entrepreneurial route of spending up to 2 years to search for a $2 to $5 million EBITDA, somewhat boring business. And the businesses are everything from airplane parts to manufacturer furniture reps to porta potties to senior living homes to dental clinics, right? It's a very broad set of type of companies, and it's geographically very dispersed. And the incredible thing about it is a playbook that has been so well refined and thought through that over 40 years, and you can look at the study, the average net annual return is over 35%. And nothing comes close to this that I'm aware of. Maybe some of your listeners know, but if you look at the stock market, it's been around 7 or 8% a year for that period. You look at private equity, venture, somewhere in the 11, 12, 13 over that same period. And so this is an astonishing number. It's better than Warren Buffett, and coming from Omaha. And if you'd invested in Warren from the beginning, you'd be rich beyond rich. And this is actually compounded better. So how can that be? And especially how can that be? People often say you're taking a 32, 34-year-old MBA student who's never run a company probably. These days, sometimes it's a team, but how can they go into an industry they don't really know that much about and run a company that they've never done? And it's because search funds have created, as I mentioned, this playbook whereby the searcher spends up to 2 years looking, learning about industries, doing what we're doing, interviewing lots of owners, talking to owners, learning about what it takes to be successful, and ultimately surrounds themselves with a set of investors who are completely aligned with the goal of success and who are very much roll up the sleeve, get in there, and be mentoring, coaching the entrepreneur into success. And because it's a smaller company, it's not like venture. Come back to this conversation. It's not like venture where everybody's piling on and valuations are kind of in the crazy orbit. And it's not where you're competing for deals as much. And it's more, okay, let's go in with a very reasonable valuation. If we're talking that, it's generally around 3, 4, 5 times EBITDA multiple. And growing this thing to where there's a layer of private equity firms who have funds, larger funds, who want to buy at double the multiple if you can get it big enough for them to put into their portfolio. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes.
So again, it's at the end of the day, I love it. If you remember the things I've talked about already today, it's super entrepreneurial. I get to share, hopefully I have some wisdom, share my learnings over the years. The entrepreneur, they now have changed the name from search fund to ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition. And that's what it is. It's acquiring something that you can run, and it's about to have a moment. It is having a moment. Like you said, you didn't know about it before this. I have literally explained this now to over 1,000 people. And people are now sending me articles. I guess Bloomberg did one recently. Probably 25 people sent me that article. And so I think you're going to hear a lot more about this. But it's still relative to the opportunity set, a drop in the bucket. Because the baby boomers are aging out, and there's millions of businesses that they want to sell, they want to preserve their legacy, they want to take care of their employees, but this is not an efficient market. This is not that active of a market. It's so small and under the radar. So I think, though, more and more people, and not just MBA students, that's my focus on the traditional search fund, but mid-career folks are going to say, I don't want to be in the corporate grind. I want to go buy a business. And so there's going to be a bunch of, in venture in the early days, it was a bunch of guys on Sand Hill Road who sat around and said, I got a deal, you got a deal. Search has been that way for 30 years. That's changing. More money is coming in. It is getting, more schools are teaching it. You know, a decade ago, 2 schools taught it, Stanford and Harvard. Now 20 of the top business schools teach it. So it is having a moment. But again, it's really exciting because it's truly entrepreneurial. And for me, what makes it especially exciting is, yeah, the asset class is crushing it and doing great. And, you know, it's something I want in my own personal portfolio. But it's also a way for women, underrepresented folks, people of color. There's no glass ceiling if you're the CEO, right? You go buy a company. And I think there's going to be more and more opportunity for folks who maybe don't feel like they can work through the corporate ladder program. And that's exciting. And so anyway, you can probably tell by the way I'm talking about this that I'm very excited about it. I just came back from the Stanford Search Fund Conference, 600 people, sold out, wait list. I'm going to the Harvard one. There's one at Booth, there's one at Duke, there's one at MIT. So again, it's now being taught and done on 6 continents around the world. So it's international. So it's for people who don't know about it, it's really an exciting moment.
So the fund that you're raising is going to be investing in people who are going to do their own search fund as they originally called, right? Or are you going to buy, because a fund naturally has to have a portfolio, right?
Yeah, so Yeah, first of all, I want to be really clear. I'm not soliciting here and I'm not asking people to invest. I'm just explaining and answering your questions, what I'm doing. But what I would say is I personally, my journey was about, well, over 5 years ago, I knew I wanted to look at this asset class and I started to invest in it and get to know it and get to know all the players and go to these conferences. And I realized that access was really hard. It's a bit of an insider's game, changing a little bit, but it's hard. And there's, again, search fund is not a fund. So I call them searchers. So what has happened as the asset class has matured is there are now funds, like venture funds were for the startups. There are now funds investing in the searchers. Okay. And they're doing a great job. And often they're people who had successful searches and exits, and they raise a fund and they can go work with the searchers because they've done it. I love that mentoring piece of this. And so what we're doing at Agate Hound is we're investing in some of the top funds that invest in the searchers. Because I found that what I hope to have happen at the end of the day is we're going to have 80 to 120 small American businesses run by really smart, ambitious, hungry, gritty entrepreneurs out of the top business schools. And I wake up every day just smiling that I get to do this because it's so much fun.
That's amazing. So you mentioned that it used to be or still is a little bit of an insider's game. If Silicon Valley is located on Sand Hill Road at that point of time, like who are the insiders in the search fund game?
Well, it's really been interesting. In the history of search fund, there's been about $3 billion invested. That's a small number over 40 years, right? I mean, there are $3 billion funds in venture, just to give you, right? You understand what I'm saying. So it's not big. It's not a big asset class. Now, having said that, in the last 5 years, probably a quarter has been invested, just to give you the ramp. Okay. So there's some funds out there that have been on fund 3, 4, 5. Not that many, but they're the ones who we're looking at because they have a track record. They know how to do this. One of the cool things about search, and one of the things that excites me, is a lot of the funds actually have a partner or two teaching search or ETA at the top business school. So not only do they get first look at these students, right, but they get to coach, mentor, and invest in them. And I always say, well, gosh, I wish I had been the computer science professor at Stanford teaching Larry and Sergey and saying, oh, by the way, I've got a fund. Can I invest in this thing called Google? Well, these professors at Stanford, Harvard, MIT, blah, 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 are teaching the playbook. And a few students raise their hand and say, I want to do this. And the professors often invest in them. And they have funds. So it's a very interesting sourcing model, right? And one that's done quite well. I guess I'll just say it that way.
Interesting. So we're almost at the end of our conversation, and I ask all my guests a couple of common quick questions.
Sure.
And I want to quickly go through them. So first question, who are the mentors who shaped your career?
Who are the mentors in my life?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, so many. My mom was a huge influence and mentor to me in many, many ways, for sure. I am lucky at Microsoft to have a couple people that guided me through that. I was a bit of a searcher at Microsoft because I had never worked in a corporate situation like that. So I had mentors there. Irv Grousbeck, who is the godfather of search, who's on my board of advisors, is a mentor. I believe so strongly that everybody should create some kind of mentor board of advisors. I have been extremely lucky. Warren Buffett, actually, we knew him growing up, but we don't know him well. I'm not going to say that. Has always been a mentor. I read his annual report every year. He's a mentor. I get inspiration in so many ways. It's, to me, the path of entrepreneurship, the path of trying to create a new way, it's very hard to do it alone. So mentorship is super important to me. I love the question.
What are your favorite books, and are you reading anything interesting right now?
Oh gosh. So if your audience doesn't know about Libby, Libby is a app for borrowing library books. They let you borrow for 21 days. I've always got 3 books on it. And they always range from some kind of, life hacking book. I was just reading Peter Attia's book, Outlive. I'm reading this beautiful book on the wondrous nature of nature. I read a lot. I listen to books a lot. I'm an obsessive step counter, which I've got to get over, but I, at one point, was averaging for several years 25,000 steps a day. So I have lots of time to listen to podcasts and to books. Books are hugely important to me.
What are your favorite podcasts?
My favorite podcast? Oh my gosh. Well, Peter Attia has one. I actually love Scott Galloway's.
Pivot or Prop G.
Yeah, Prop G.
Yeah, Prop G is good.
Yeah, really good. There's several, by the way, on search funds. If people do a Bing search, I always like to say a Bing search, you'll find several good ones to learn more. So I have a community of folks. We share great podcasts because it's hard to get through them, right? And so I listen to a lot of podcasts. So if you have some good ones offline, let's do a little exchange. I'm happy to share.
I'm always constantly looking for a good podcast because that's one of my hacks of learning new things, because I think podcast is an interesting knowledge source. What advice would you give to a new college grad who's either thinking about getting into investing or starting a company?
Be curious. Ask a lot of questions. Go try things. Find things. Honestly, everyone says follow your passion. Yeah, that's part of it. But find things where you're going to have mentors built in, where you're going to be around people smarter than you. Be around people who are going to inspire you, right? And then, it's okay. It's okay to fail. There's nothing wrong with it as long as you get up and go to it again. And people just graduating, especially in a time where people are going to live longer. I'm not saying dilly-dally. I'm not saying take several years off and do nothing. I'm saying you have such an opportunity to take risks and to fail and to get up that I would say go do things that are, I think Ken Burns had this great, Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker, has a sign that, take on ideas that scare you. And I think that's right. Because if they're attracting you and they scare you, that means there's some juice in there, there's some energy in there, there's some attraction. And if it's scary, it means you're not sure you can really do it, but it's appealing. Like that's what I would say.
Well, I think that's a great note to end the conversation. Thanks, John. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing your experience with us.
I loved it. Thanks again. And let's share some podcasts.
Sure.
All right.